Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology with all things security. Our SMESec, which we do every day at 12:30 for 15 minutes, talking about security in plain English, not in Klingon. So we're going to talk about the next stage of the Mitre Att&ck framework. So we started off early this week, and we started with stage one, where we look at reconnaissance, and we've worked our way through yesterday. We talked about stage three, where we talk about initial access to your systems. So the next stage on is execution. So if I bring up my slides, and we're going to talk about this stage next, so the execution stage of the Mitre Att&ck framework. So this is giving you a picture about the process that the hackers follow to actually get into and compromise your systems. So we're following that through because it's good to be in the process that the hackers follow and in their mindset when you're looking to protect against it. So let's look at these stages then. So first, command and script interpreters. So most operating systems have some kind of command line or scripting interface. So they're utilizing things to be able to launch code, to be able to change settings, to be able to promote privileges. So Windows itself has got a command line. You can actually launch it using a command CMD, and it comes up on the screen. Most all Macs have a embedded interpreter and Bash scripting language, and all Unix systems have the same. Bash is the name for born again shell. It's a shell service that's within that Unix operating system, of Unix derivative of Linux, to be able to run commands, so pull information, provide information, push commands to actually run the software. So using those command line, they can actually pull software using remote services to extract the file and put it from a web service or an FTP service onto the system. Once it's onto the system, they can unpackage it and they can run that piece of software. So first of all, they can actually use the inbuilt command and scripting language to do this. They can also use what's called container administration. So containers are a new way of deploying software, and a lot of organizations using them to actually make it much more agile in the way that they develop software. So very small amount, and we call these microservices, can be put inside this little container, which doesn't have all of the operating system in it. It just has all the components that's needed for that particular container. Some of the common ones out there are Docker, that you might see around there, and Docker Swarm, and the other orchestration tools like Kubernetes that are used quite regularly. But they can actually use this container administration piece, especially in cloud services and also in Linux workloads, to be able to spin up a workload that they want to actually use within it. They can then deploy that container, where that is locally, so they can deploy it and run it to have some kind of malware running in it. But they can also deploy it elsewhere, so they can remotely deploy that and hook into that to be able to send information for command and control, which we're going to talk about today. They can also use exploitation for client execution. So what they can do is actually entice you as a user to do things, to run a particular process. This could be through phishing type activity, a number of other things, but also they can use a variety of other client tools to actually start an execution and use exploits to do that. They can also utilize within an operating system, we have this thing called inter-process communication. So when we've got a number of different processes running, so little bits of software running, within the operating system to be able to do something, whether that's printer, communications, like email and sending emails. These individual processes can talk to one another, and each operating system has a way to allow inter-process communication. So they can actually use that inter-process communication as well to deploy software. Another thing is most operating systems have got what we call a native API, so an application programmer's interface. So it's how they actually communicate between the operating system and different components using this programmer's interface. And again, this API can be utilized to deploy workloads. So, setting up some kind of malware, they can actually be done both remotely and locally as well. So you can actually use the native API within, say, the Windows operating system to launch a local process, but also something remotely as well. They can also utilize the job scheduling and task scheduling capabilities within the operating system. So most operating systems, Windows, Linux, have got these mechanisms where you can actually set a job to run on a particular time on a particular day. So that could be every hour, every day, or 2 a.m. in the morning every day. So you can actually set a job up, to actually run a specific piece of software or launch a particular piece of software, and off it goes. So again, they could schedule a task or a job to be run on the operating system at a particular point in time. And when we move into persistence and defense pieces for part of the attack frame, we'll see how scheduling task is used, because they're actually creating schedules to effectively reinstall software if it's been cleaned by antivirus or other tools. So it's always there in the background, being persistent by effectively redoing it. But it could be other tasks that are run to do like keyloggers and things like that to capture information on the system as well. We also this thing called shared modules, and within most operating systems there are libraries that can be used to actually be launched to give additional capabilities. Within the Windows environment, the Windows OS, there's a thing called distributed link libraries, or DLLs, and these are used to give additional functionality to the operating system to be able to run specific processes. And these shared modules can be launched, and they can actually be launched from a particular file, either locally or remotely. So again, they can actually use the shared module capability within the operating system to launch, some of this malware and get it available and ready to communicate. They can also utilize software deployment tools. So a lot of organizations have built tools to be able to use to distribute and manage software across, especially enterprise environments. There are a number of these. Microsoft have got their own SCCMM, which is a control and management tool, and there are a variety of others you get from third parties. So what the hackers will do is actually identify if you're utilizing one of these software deployment and software management tools, and if they've got an exploit for that particular tool, they'll utilize the tool itself to actually deliver their payloads, their malware across multiple environments, so allowing them to do what we call lateral movement, so move from one machine that's been compromised to others, using the inbuilt software development tools that you've actually put in place to help you manage your IT estates. They're going to use these to actually help them spread their own software around. We're also system services. So we can actually launch a system service that can do anything. If you look on your machine, there'll be system services that manage your email. There'll be system services that do audio, video, and many other things. Again, they can actually use the inbuilt system services capability to launch a particular process and have that process running in the background. And again, they can actually remotely launch them as well, because there is a remote system services capability within most operating systems. Linux and Windows has those capabilities, so you can remotely launch something. So instead of it launching locally on your local machine, it can be launched on a server or another endpoint machine elsewhere if you've got the right credentials and the communication capabilities between those devices. It can be done as well. It can also force user execution. So we talked briefly the other day about things like drive-by activities where people effectively click on something, they automatically download and load some software. There's also phishing attacks and spear phishing, which is focused specifically at certain individuals within an organization. Again, there's ways to get the user to actually execute something, but they're going to make it look like it's something that they want to execute. It could be they pop up and say that your print job has failed. Would you like to relaunch that print job? But actually, it's getting you to execute something that they want to run in the background. So they're going to make it look different to you. So you think it's quite benign and it's not going to be an issue to you. But actually, you're launching some malware and executing code that they want you to do in the background. Then finally, within Windows especially, you have this technology called WMI, or Windows Management Instrumentation. And WMI is used for the installation of software commonly within a Windows environment. It can be used for remote deployment of software as well, using these Microsoft management tools to deploy code, either automatically or manually across multiple systems. So again, they're actually going to use these inbuilt capabilities within the operating system to be able to install and execute the software that they want. And then that software will be used then to, do what they want to do in the background, raise privileges, find other network devices and try and communicate them and find ways to laterally move to those. And then later on, start to gather information, whether that's credit card information, customer information, whatever they're looking for to be able to, do whatever type of exploit they're planning to do, ransomware attack, or just steal information in some cases. So that's Mitre Att&ck stage 4 execution. We've gone through all of the different ways that the hackers could actually utilize the inbuilt capabilities in most operating systems and environments to be able to then deploy the software that they want to deploy and then execute that software. So, on the framework we've covered so far, stage 1, reconnaissance, understanding you, the environment, the host, network, what you've got and how they can get to you. We've looked at resource development, how they're building out those capabilities to be able to compromise your machines, whether that's specific tools or exploits within particular applications or operating systems. We've also talked about that initial access, how they get into you in the first place through phishing attack, drive-by type attacks, or even lateral movements to get onto your machine. And what we've covered today is execution. How they're going to do that initial execution, how they're going to install the software so they can actually then start to build out their attack. Not tomorrow, Monday, we're going to talk about persistence. And it's quite important for a hacker to become persistent. So whatever software they've actually used to actually exploit your machine and make you vulnerable to their attack, they want it to be persistent so they can use it afterwards. And most hackers are looking at a long dwell time. So dwell time is from the time the actual initial execution happens to the point where they either exploit the system or it's been identified that you've been exploited, is the dwell time. So it can be quite a long time. 6 months is quite common for a dwell time for an organisation to have been effectively violated by the hackers, and they've got their software running on multiple systems for up to 6 months, sometimes longer than that. And sometimes, depending on what infrastructure is in place and what protection has been put in place by the organisation, they only find out when the hackers actually come to them and say, we want some money, or they find all their files have just been encrypted, or data that looks definitely to have been sourced from them, it becomes available on the internet scene. So a lot of times they don't see the initial engagement, they don't see the initial exploit. It's later on that they can see that they've been exploited. So this dwell time can be quite a considerable amount of time. But we'll talk about persistence on Monday. Hope everybody has a great weekend. One thing to mention, let me just get onto my screen and take the slides away, is we've got this session next week. So if you are interested in our cybersecurity event next Wednesday, the 27th of April, it starts at 4 p.m. British Summer Time. So anybody in other countries, just account for the time difference. It's advertised on LinkedIn. It's also accessible through the link I put on the bottom. It's a pop-in event because it brings everybody to a single place, makes it easy for us to deliver the actual presentation to you. But we've got 3 different sections we're talking about. Initially, we're going to go through the current threat landscape. So Preet Brzezinski and myself are going to talk about what's happening at the moment, the kind of threats that are out there, the kind of things that we've seen being deployed, and some of the changes in methods that people have. One thing we've been talking about quite a lot recently is about email thread hijacking, and that's one of the new methods that people are using to make it quite difficult for you to see that you're actually being threatened by a particular email because it looks like it's from a colleague, part of a chain of emails that you've been speaking to them about a particular subject. So, a couple of quite interesting exploits that people are using at the moment. The other thing we're going to talk about is certification. So if any organisation is looking to partner with a third-party organisation, it's quite important that they can show that they've actually done something to make them protected. So again, certification is becoming very important. There are different types of certification. If you're a service provider, commonly people are using something like ISO 27001, which is showing that you've protected the infrastructure that you put in place to be able to deliver a service. But if you're an SME, the starting point really is the National Cyber Security Centre's piece through IASME, which is called Cyber Essentials, which gives you the basics of the self-certification route. And we'll talk about that next Wednesday. The follow-on from that is the next stage with some validation of that self-certification, which is Cyber Essentials Plus. And then on top of that, there's an additional one where it looks at people and process as well as the technical aspects, which is IASME governance. And we'll talk about all those three. Pete Rosinski will be doing all the talking. I'll be just sitting in the background listening and maybe chirping in at points in time, but we'll cover that off on Wednesday. And final thing we're going to talk about is the difference between passive and active threat prevention, because we're seeing that a lot of organisations now need to move to this effective active protection posture rather than being in a passive protection posture. When I talk to customers about this, the easiest thing to say is, a passive thing is to have good locks on your doors on your home or your office to try and stop people getting in. But an active one is actually be able to detect that they've actually broken you or they're coming to attack you, and then have someone in place to actually deal with it straight away so that you can actually stop the attack instantly. And that's the difference between the two. And we'll talk through the differences there and how it can be deployed, because it can be challenging for a lot of organisations to deploy active threat protection. We'll talk about ways that we can help with that. So thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully you'll join me next Monday where we move on to our fifth stage, which is persistence, and also hopefully see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m. for our cybersecurity session where we're talking about those three areas, current threat landscape, certification, and also active threat prevention. See you later. Have a great weekend.